Thank you, Mr. President. I guess I'm getting sort of tagged with this trailer bill, and I suppose it's because the issue first arose in the Budget Subcommittee that I'm privileged to chair. I've heard several issues raised today: abuse of process, constitutionality, what some of the issues are, and of course some conceptions as to what the new tax appeal process will be. And I'd like to speak to a few of those, probably not to convince those of you who are opposed, because that simply doesn't often occur on this floor, but to at least set the record straight as to what this is all about. First, as to the constitutionality or the unconstitutionality of eliminating the Board of Equalization. That does not happen in this trailer bill. The Board of Equalization remains as a board with elected board members. The Board of Equalization continues and will continue to perform those constitutional roles and responsibilities with respect to the equalization of property tax, alcohol excise tax, the tax on insurers, and the like. The Board of Equalization, to the extent that there are tax appeals associated with those issues, unitary tax, for example, the board will continue to hear those, just as the Constitution provides, just as the voters in the 19th century specified that they wanted this particular board to do. The Board of Equalization will continue to have district offices and staff to address constituent issues. And yes, the Board of Equalization members will continue to be able to function as tax advocates for those constituents with respect to not only the issues, frankly, that the board is involved with, but any other tax issue, I suppose, if that's what the board members decide to do. And frankly, some of that tax advocacy in the context of their quasi-judicial role is what caused and continues to cause this board problems with regard to ex parte communications and advocacy for taxpayers, and then turning around and acting as a judge on the very tax appeal that they took a position on earlier. Questionable conduct, I would suggest, but to the extent that those areas fall within the board's constitutional roles and responsibilities, the board will continue to exist and will continue to provide that function. Now, as to the process, I'm not going to engage in a debate with anyone as to whether policy matters should be contained in the budget or budget trailer bills. I may, in fact, agree with some of you who object to that, and in fact do. But the fact of the matter is, it is what it is, and that's what we deal with here in the California legislature, in particular with this administration, because that's a particular position that the administration has adopted. So let's talk about the process. In the normal course of events, had this gone through our normal process, the bill would have been introduced, it would have been referred to the Governance and Finance Committee, you would have had a hearing, perhaps a hearing of 45 minutes, maybe even an hour on this in Governance and Finance, and then it would be over. The bill would be sent to Appropriations, and for those of you who don't serve on Governance and Finance, myself included, the first time we'd have an opportunity to have process would be right here on this floor doing exactly what we're doing today, and that's the process that you get in the California Senate. Now, let me talk to you about the process that we followed in this particular case. In Budget Subcommittee number 4 on State Administration and Local Government, we first started to address these issues last year, and as you know, those of you on the Senate are always invited to attend Budget Subcommittee hearings or meetings, whether you're on the subcommittee or not. It was a fully agended, noticed hearing having to do with the Board of Equalization operations. We discussed their penchant for offices, their misuse of offices, and a variety of other things last year. This year, we had 2 full hearings, at least 2 full hearings, consisting of multiple hours on the Board of Equalization issues. We covered their offices. We covered misuse of employees. We covered a whole variety of things, including continued violation of budget control language, which required them to use revenue positions for revenue functions. The process was covered in the newspaper. So for those of you who read the newspaper, you could easily read what we do and what we were doing in Budget Subcommittee 4 with respect to the Board of Equalization. Now, I will tell you, as a result of these hearings and the multiple audits that were conducted and continue to be conducted with respect to the Board of Equalization activities, there were multiple issues identified. And as I said, for those of you who are aware of the newspaper stories and the TV stories and the testimony in the hearings, you will recall that operational cultural issues were identified. Hostile work environment, where board members intimidated employees of the agency. You are aware that the executive director testified in Budget Subcommittee 4 that he feared for his job and did not know who to turn to because of the way the organization was organized. You heard about inappropriate intervention by board members in administrative activities, including tax audits and appeals. You heard about inconsistencies in operations from one district to another. Some district offices accept cash collections, some district offices don't. No particular consistency, and who's responsible? The individual board members and the Board of Equalization. You heard about actions that I just spoke about, violations of budget control language, which we as a Senate put in place, restricting the board's opportunity to utilize revenue collection people for non-revenue activities. You heard about complaints from individual BOE staff members about attempts to influence and intimidate them. And as I mentioned, you heard about the inability of the executive director to effectively manage his operation because of interference by board members of the BOE. And finally, you heard about significant errors in sales and use tax allocation throughout the state, impacting our cities and our counties, which is why CSAC, the league, testified at the Budget Committee with regard to this particular provision. $350 million in sales and use tax allocation or misallocation that still remains uncorrected by this Board of Equalization that we have in this state. You heard about offices opened without permission. You heard about employees shifted from headquarters to district offices, again, without permission and without accountability. And again, you heard about revenue positions and revenue staff members utilized for questionable non-revenue activity, perhaps not even with a sufficient nexus to state business. So, I don't know. I'd say it's time to fix some of these problems. Now, there was some comment about small taxpayers and small business having access. This particular trailer bill and the provisions in this trailer bill are designed to guarantee small business and individual taxpayers the same degree of access to the Office of Tax Appeals as they currently have to the Board of Equalization. Individuals do not need to be represented by attorneys. They do not need to be represented by CPAs. They can represent themselves. They can be represented by their neighbor, their friend, their nephew, or their niece, without the need for attorneys. Now, it's a taxpayer-friendly proposal, and it's designed for open and transparency adjudication of tax appeals. Now, I would suggest that this trailer bill and the provisions in it will instill more professionalism in our tax operation while providing the public as much, if not more, public access and, frankly, a fair administration of our tax laws. Now, with respect to this trailer bill versus policy bill discussion, I would also finally suggest this. If we want to make an example of the trailer bill versus policy discussion, if we want to draw a line in the sand on this particular issue, given the abuse that has occurred inside the walls of the Board of Equalization, given the intimidation of staff members inside that particular agency, given the misuse of personnel by board members, I would suggest that this is probably not the example to use. With that, Mr. President, I respectfully ask for an aye vote.